Hey, Composing Gloves here. I'm wearing a hat, and today we're going to be talking about the 3 methods of equalization. There are 3. If you can think of a 4th one, let me know. So the 3 ones that I know and use and pretty much will use forever and everyone else uses are equalizing for size, equalizing for definition, and complementary EQing. You may have different names for these things. Like, for example... Okay, let's just start at the beginning. We'll bring them up as we go. So equalizing for size. You're given like a kick drum or a recording, or you have a sound and you want to make it sound bigger than life. You want to really bring out things in it that were originally small, and you're going to make them big and accentuate them or emphasize them. And, you're going to do that route. The next one, so that's equalizing for size. Equalizing for definition. You have a sound, and you're going to make it sound cleaner and crisper than it sounded before. Maybe it's got some resonance in it. Maybe it's got some boxiness to it. Maybe it's got some sort of quality you don't like. It sort of makes it not sound as great as it could. So you're going to try equalizing for definition. This is one that beginners tend to grab. It's also known as search and destroy, and it tends to get kind of surgical. And I don't know why beginners grab this one so fast, but they grab it and they go crazy with it. And it's like, that's actually, it's okay, I guess, but bigger, smoother strokes generally are a better move, like most of the time, unless you're going for like those resonant peaks. But even then, they get like crazy. You'll see what I mean in a second. And then the last one, number 3, is complementary EQing. So let's say 2 sounds are competing for space in your mix, and you want sound A to be louder because it's more important. Well, what you do is, they're masking each other is the problem. So to combat that, you reduce the sound in the area of the spectrum that's important to this instrument, right? You reduce the sound in sound B in the frequencies that are important to this instrument. That way this instrument can now overcome sound B easier. But on top of that, you may even boost sound A in that same area to make it really come through. It's like you've given a weakness pill to one and a strength pill to the other. Now, I've written a masterpiece for us to experiment with some of these EQing, and I've given it a very small mix down. Like, I literally just took down a couple of faders. That's it. So I didn't even really pan it. We're not going to worry about it. We're focusing on the equalization. So let's see, how far can we take this EQ thing? It sounds like this. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's pretty raw. So let's go. And these are not the sounds I'd use. This is I just came up with something so we can just begin to make some EQing moves. Okay, so we have our kick drum. Let's start with that one. I'm going to use the Fruity Parametric EQ2 just because a lot of you guys will have it, and it's better to master one and not worry about all the others. So this is the one I recommend you really learn first, or one similar to it. I showed you a variety of options in the types of EQ one. I showed you 3 good ones: TDR Nova, this one, and the Melda Audio one. So let's go ahead. Let's look at this one. So first, we're going to approach our kick, right? So we're going to solo our kick just to get a good listen to it. And we're going to, just think critically about it. We're going to listen, and we're going to look at this. We're like, All right. So it seems we know that kicks are basically pitch bends. They're going boom, boom, boom. You could see the pitch bend actually occurring. So you see it actually moving down. So that's a cool thing about a kick. Now, when we're EQing a kick, we're going to make it larger than life, right? That's our goal here with this one. We're going for size. And we could get into layering kicks and all that stuff. It's more compositional and sound design, so we're not gonna. And I'm also assuming that you've watched the critical listening series. You're familiar with the areas of the spectrum and what generally lies in those different areas. So first, we're just going to do size to keep it kind of simple. So I'm going to boost, in this case. Kicks for this sort of a genre, this style, usually have a sweet spot somewhere down here. And this is going to change according to the key you're writing in. But by boosting in different areas down here, you can emphasize the kick in a way that is good towards your song. You're going to need to use your ear and see which one fits the best, because there are going to be differences. And when we're also EQing down here, we want to be careful about where we put this boost, because wherever you put this boost, and I'll usually start out with a boost about that size, like not a super wide boost, kind of a narrow, localized. I may get more specific depending on the quality and feedback I'm getting. But where you put this boost will also change the envelope, because you saw how clear that pitch bend was. If we look at this, you can see it moving down. So if we put it down here, that means that the end of our kick drum, the bow, that whoa at the end of it is going to be emphasized. So it's going to sound slightly off because the attack, that initial hit, happens up here. So we are going to want to be careful, and this is something that comes up with kicks all the time, is putting this boost in just the right spot. So what we're going to do is we're going to boost it up a little bit, and then I'm just going to move around down here and find a spot that I like. Yeah, this is, I might even take the pitch of the kick drum down just a smidge. So I'm going to move the pitch down to try and change where the sweet spot lies. Sometimes this is a trick I do with kicks sometimes. See, I like that more. So I'm going to run with that. So, you know, whatever, maybe I'll pick this spot. This is really more effective when you grab a multi-band compressor or some sort of a transient shaper or something and you begin to mess with the kick in that sort of a method. We're going to learn about those later on. So I way prefer doing that. But okay, we got this. I'm going to remove some of this here mid stuff. And so we're going to give a listen and find a good spot to remove. Now you might be going, what did you pick right here? Why this particular spot in that shape? Why not like something like this or something like this? And the answer is, first off, when you're doing very narrow boosts, this is a much more rare thing that happens in nature versus this, which is much more like comb filtering and is everywhere in nature. So this sounds a lot more natural than this, just because it occurs more often. It's not that this never occurs; it's just it occurs a lot less often. So if you get in a cave or some sort of a tube, this is more likely to occur. But most of the time, we're dealing with stuff that's filtering itself somehow. And so we're sort of used to hearing that sort of a thing. So that sounds more natural. So that's one. The other thing is, so cuts, there's a thing, filters do stranger things when you boost than when you cut. That's something else that I've really noticed is when you boost, you're going to color your signal in different ways, because when you boost, if you're using an amplification, as we talked about in the types of EQ, depending on the method your EQ uses, when you amplify something, it's going to do more, it's going to go about the process differently than if you were to cut it. Especially if you're using, like, for example, like a passive EQ, it would just attenuate it less. And so by comparison, everything else would have remained the same. It's one of the reasons why some people rave about passive EQs versus an active EQ. It's going to be using a whole separate deal to get this thing to sound louder. So you want to be like, that's another reason why boosting sounds different, and why you may want to avoid really extreme boosts like that. There's also like technical reasons why. But anyways, I just picked a spot. Use your ears and you pick one. And I was making a trade-off between the low end of the kick and getting that timing of the kick correctly and getting a fullness that I enjoyed. And this isn't like the greatest kick in the world. I'd pick a kick that I really liked or fit the track, move from there. But anyways, we got our kick, right? And so I'm going to now EQ a little bit for some definition. I'm going to take out some of this stuff right here. And you'll notice as you get going, more and more stuff begins to reside down here in the 250 range. It's typically what people refer to as the fullness range. And a lot of instruments are going to sound really full right there. If you do my listening exercises from Critical Listening, this is really obvious that as soon as you begin to roll off up around here, that was weird. Anyway, things start to sound very thin as soon as you do that. So we're going to go ahead and remove some of this because we want to make room for other things. And we're going to leave our kick to sort of reign in the lower territory. So we're EQing for definition in this case. So if we put this back, so it's really just there's just some low going on right there. So we don't care about that. So we'll get that. And it also brings this out a little quite nicely. So I quite enjoy that. And then sometimes people will do this. Well, sometimes this is a common move, is you could bring some up here in the 2 to 3K range and get some snap back in your signal, just so it has a clear upper end that can punch through. Because that's a very important cue for us, is when we hear that, it gives the kick that ability. It allows us to locate where the kick is easier. So sometimes this may be a bad idea. It just depends on the effect you're going for. And again, mixing totally depends on the circumstance. So we have our kick pretty much EQ'd mostly, and we'll come back and we'll do comparisons and make listens. We'll do comparisons and change things as we go. But we have EQ'd for size. Next on the hats, let's go ahead and EQ for some, I don't know why I pointed up. EQ for some definition. So this is pretty cool, but our hat, if you listen, that sounds pretty low. And that may or may not be the sound I want. Sometimes I want a low sounding hat. Other times you want something that's a little brighter, right? But we see down here that there's this reminiscent frequencies down here, that there's stuff down there, and that may or may not be something you want. Low end ambience, though, that's because that's pretty much what it is. It's the sound of the room. This low end ambience, or I'm not sure if it's the room or if this has been synthesized or whatever, but the point is there's crap down there, and you may not want that down there. It will build up if you have a lot of tracks with that on it. And in live recording situations, when you've recorded everything in the same room, it's often a good idea to high pass a lot of stuff. However, in electronic music, you could suck the low end ambience right out of your track by doing stuff like that. So you want to be careful. In this case, with the hi-hat, it doesn't need the information down here for it. So we're going to go sort of a typical route and just roll it off. We're just going to remove it. And you could use a low pass filter to do this. I'm just going to use a low shelf and just remove it like that. The difference between a low pass filter and a low shelf is I have the cutoff, right? And it just stays at that level. So I'm only able to reduce, 18 decibels or so. I'm not able to get super in there. But like other filters, I could make this into a low pass instead, which if I were to bring up like TDR Nova, I know I said I was going to do this, but it's just simpler in TDR Nova. You see I have a low pass option, not a low pass. I meant high pass. This whole time I meant to be saying high pass. So I can actually roll it up. And this thing, the freaking no shelf there, man, it's rolling that jazz off. But I'm going to stick to what I said earlier. So I get a lot more gain reduction there, so it's a little more effective at that job. So that's one reason why you would use the filter on your EQ. That might be a reason why you grab a particular EQ over another. So we come over here and we're going to listen while we're doing this. So that's more of the range that I'm looking for. Maybe I'm going to do a boost to do a little bit of size thing, and then reduce some of this high end. And I don't want to use the high shelf here. I'm just going to leave that alone. I'm just going to grab one that's already here. It's a peaking. I'm going to make the Q kind of narrow and then bring it down right here. So I'm going to emphasize this range. So I'm really sitting this in a specific spot. So later on, if I want to change this is totally, I can come back here and change it if I desire. What would be cool is to sort of move it around just a touch, just like this. During the track, that'd be a creative move, and that's something that you, as the mixing engineer, you can make moves like that. Like you're gonna want to check to see if the artist is cool with that, if you're working with an artist, but usually they are. They're down for adding additional interest into their track. Maybe they are very not into that, what you did though, so who knows. But anyways, here, okay, so we've EQ'd for some definition. We rolled off the low end. We've talked about you might not always want to do that, but in this case, we went ahead and did it, and we've got a sound, and so we've done our okay, cool. So we've got definition, we've got some size, equalization down. And you go through and you do this for songs. Now, keep in mind, we've had very little flux with these sounds. As the flux increases, the amount of EQing and the way you EQ changes, because you may have to automate things on and off. You may have to say, oh, turn on here, don't turn on here. So let's go ahead and go to our first battle of the frequencies. We have this sound. Where's my Harmer bus? And all right, so now we've got this sound, right? And he's going to compete with our kick a little bit. It's pretty up there, though. It's not super close to the kick. But you can see that the kick's high end is sort of battling with this thing. And that's actually, we could even make this lower. Let's make this lower so it really combats with the kick. Maybe you want something down here. No, that's too low. Let's say we got this, right? Now we play it. Our kick's having problems, it's not as clean as it could be. They fight a little bit. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to leave the kick the way I am. And now I want to take a mental note and be like, okay, I boosted it right around 121 hertz. And I'm hovering my mouse. Oh, it even says right underneath it, 112 hertz. But up here, I like where my mouse particularly was. It was like at 121 or whatever. Okay, so that's great. So now let's come over here and add an EQ. And something you may want to do while you're doing this too is just write mix EQ and you shift click. That way you know later on when you come back that these were mixing EQs, because I said that sometimes I will actually use these as filters, dynamic, basically like a crazy box that I just automate, and it just spits out timbres everywhere, and then I use another EQ for mixing. So I will try to name my stuff if I can remember to do it. So this one's going to be our mix EQ as well, and in this one we're going to mix according to, we're complementary mixing on this one. So we have frequencies in this one that we want to pop out. They're more important to us than the frequencies that are in this one. So we're going to go ahead and open it up, and we know that it's in the 112 hertz range. So let's go ahead and give it a listen right now. And we see that this thing has all sorts of frequencies going on here. There's a couple of things you're going to kind of want to do on a sound that's got stuff like this going on. Because we see that down here, down by like 20 hertz, there's freaking stuff dancing around down there. That's like rumbly territory. So if you were to play this over a club system, it'd be like it'd just be all that low end right there. The high end, because it's so like, it's like very defined, because it's so defined, it would make up for it, but it's still going to sound a little less clean, and your speakers may not be able to reproduce this properly because it's so low. So you go with the impression that it's going to sound great on that system because it sounded great on your monitors. Even like nice monitors can have problems going down this low. So what I will do is, first, let's go ahead and do the complementary EQing. So we've already done a boost over here. So all we really have to do is cut in that same area. So let's go ahead, find 112 hertz-ish right there, 112, 114. It's kind of a big Q, a big bandwidth. That's fine. And we're going to remove it. We're going to move it like 6 dB or so. And if we play it, now I'm going to do some A/B. So I'm going to turn it off so you can hear the difference, and you're going to be listening for the relationship with the kick and this sound. So you could hear the difference. The kick comes through just a little bit more than it did before, and this can get this could be a big deal as this happens over and over and over. You may find yourself cutting more here. It depends on whatever the relationship is going on here. So here's it with it off. And you hear that low end of the kick, and now here it is with it on. And you see that has a little bit harder of a time breathing through. And this is going to be a lot easier if you just do this on your own speakers. I'm not sure how much of these sort of differences make it over YouTube, but the point is you're doing something to make room down there. Now, the other thing with this sound is there's a lot of low end, and this isn't a difference you're always going to hear, but we are going to grab TDR Nova because of that filter. I'm going to use a 24 pole filter, so 24, and I'm going to roll it off. I'm going to put it at like 30 hertz, right? So I'm going to roll off that stuff that was down there because you don't want that. So we're going to get rid of that. That's just low rumble. Not good. So now our track's beginning to sound a little more tight. Things are fitting in their own little spots. The hi-hat comes clear as day. And another thing is because we're boosting and stuff, there are going to be level changes that happen. And one of the exercises I have you do in the critical listening series is to look at the level changes that are happening when you boost particular frequencies. Bass can be a big issue when you're boosting because of the level differences. So there's really an art, and we're going to get into more sophisticated ways of dealing with this. But right now, we have done the 3 methods of EQ. And so if we were to go through here and just turn off our EQs, and I know I didn't adjust the levels for that, so you'd go through and do another level check after you do some EQ. But let's go ahead. Well, let's look at one last thing. There's only one element left. It's the pad. Now you see the pad sits really obviously, like it's really nice. You can hear that really easy. But let's say that we don't want the pad. The pad's going to be, if we look at this, it lives mostly right here, which is actually quite nice. So it leaves our hi-hat in its area alone. So we're not going to touch it up there. There are a couple tones down here, and those are just less important. So you may consider doing this. And maybe just target where some of those are. So take 2 peaking filters and just bring those down. Other times, you may just leave it there. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it doesn't matter at all. Like, you don't always have to touch every sound. That's another big one that a lot of new people, they put EQs on everything, which is, we're deliberately doing that right now, but it's not always necessary. But now you've seen it. We have EQing for size, EQing for definition, and complementary EQing. And you're going to be doing a lot of this when there are other things as we get into dynamic processing that are going to make this more and more intricate, because you'll have better ways of solving some of these problems, because these are all static cuts, so they don't move unless you automate them, and that can sometimes be a problem. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn off all the equalizers, and I'm just simply going to turn the effects off on these channels, and we are going to listen to it before and after. So this is without effects, and this is with effects. I wonder if there's a way to do this all at once. Now, I suggest you turn up your monitors. I'm going to do it one more time. So here we go. Before effects. Listen to the kick and where it sits and how it's covered and where the hi-hat sits now. All right, now with effects, with the EQ. So we've added that extra little layer of shimmer, that extra little definition. So we did some EQ, all three methods were used. You're going to use all three methods a lot. So it's just something that you do. All right, so I've also pulled open my track Night Shield right here because I want to look at the guitar part. And in it, the guitar part moves around. And let's do equalization for definition. This one's more along the lines of search and destroy that you will very commonly see. The one that I said, this is very popular for new people, who are particularly people who are mixing bands. So like they've tracked a band, they go like really crazy with this one sometimes. So there might be an element in here that you might not like, and it may be clashing, it may be eating headroom, resonant peaks that appear. So you're going to use the technique search and destroy. So we're going to find our guitar track, which lives right here, and you can hear the ringing in it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ignore anything else that I've done, and we're just going to go ahead and pull open EQ, and let's go ahead and just look at this. And so those really bright tones are going to be happening right here, but there's usually going to be an area of the spectrum that's going to be a little more resonant than the rest of it, and people like to duck that, especially with snare drums and stuff. You'll go through, you'll find wherever the problem is, and then you'll sweep it down. So what you do to do this method is you boost, you make your band relatively narrow, and I think it's easier to use the controls here because you'd be a little more precise. And we're going to move this thing up and down as we're listening to find a spot that maybe we don't quite like. Once we find that spot that rings out, we're going to then remove it. So here we go. Like right there. Maybe we don't want that ringing out. You can tell this frequency is way louder than the rest of them, so we could duck it. So it sounds a little more clear, and you'll also be able to bring it up further because that frequency is resonant. It's eating headroom. So let's go ahead and do it one more time. You typically do this like maybe 2-3 times. So we're going to boost it. We're going to make it narrow. We're going to sweep around and listen. So stay right there. Yep, that's it. I don't see anything else that I really want to do. So something else is you may make the bands a bit wider to get more at the frequency that you're desiring. Maybe because it's usually you'll find the one really bad spot, but then you got to remove some of the neighboring frequencies as well, just a little bit. So you make your band a bit bigger. And this is a pretty severe cut, 12 dB. That's like a lot. Okay, most of the time there are cuts that are similar to this. This is like, we could probably back that off. But you hear how different that sounds. And if we change it back to before, you hear that ring. I actually like the ring, so I leave it in the actual track, but we can very easily target it. And so some people really prefer this. Others, like myself in this particular case, this is the outro, and it's playing by itself for the most part. So I like that. It gives this sort of, I don't know, I feel like I'm in a cave, like, whoo, just going on forever. Just kind of this weird deal. But that's Search and Destroy, and a lot of again, if you're mixing tracks and stuff, you'll be using this one. But I've seen people that get uber duper super surgical with what they're doing here. Don't worry about being like Mr. Precise all the time when you're EQing. You saw that in the other example we were doing, that this is not something because you're dealing with synthesized stuff. So you're going to be generally doing broader things. This is okay to be surgical like this, but usually people get a little crazy with this. Don't be afraid to just do broad things. Just do broad cuts, broad cut fix that too. And it feels a little more musical. It's one of the reasons why the ones with only a couple knobs are so straightforward sometimes, is they just do stuff and you just get the sound that you want instead of freaking out about stuff like this. Like, oh, there's a resonant peak here. I gotta like exactly find it and remove it perfectly. Like, that's cool. Sometimes I do that. I'm not saying I don't do it. I'm just saying be careful about getting too crazy. So just to recap, broad boosts, broad cuts are good. Narrow boosts usually sound unnatural, but narrow cuts don't. I recommend mastering this one first, mastering one EQ. That way when you're given those other EQs, first off, you go, wow, this EQ responds very differently than the one that I'm using here in the studio. Like, for example, the EQs in the Logic SSL or the Pultec EQs or whatever on a lunchbox. So those are like legendary equalizers. So getting to use them is great, but it's only really great if you have some sort of a reference point for like, wow, this thing really responds differently than what I'm used to. And that's really what it comes down to, is just getting to know your equalizer, how it sounds, and some ways to get effective things that you want. Like, for example, I come in here all the time just for the filters. I really like the filters in here. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.